This week we are covering the role of the Attorneys General in criminal justice and in criminal justice reform. And so I'd like to begin by going back a long time ago when my college classmate at the University of Maine and my friend Stephen King wrote a novel called Tommyknockers, in which some heinous crime occurred in rural Maine, and the head of the Maine State Police said, "We need to get the AG here, Jim Tierney. We have to get him here." And so he sent a jet to get me. I was camping with my family in Utah, and they pulled me from around the campfire, and I came back. I solved the crime. This is what we call fiction. Not a word of this is remotely true. As Maine's Attorney General for 10 years, I had no criminal justice experience at all. I hadn't tried any cases, hadn't made any significant decisions, but there I was through the political process, essentially having become Attorney General. And I had a great team of people in the criminal division. We tried all the homicides. But at the end of the day, I realized I had an affirmative role to play here, and one in which I didn't have any experience. So the first thing I learned about criminal law was, regardless of all the appeals and all the law school classes and the motions and the like, it really comes down to facts, really stubborn facts. If where you're sitting right now, someone drove by at a high rate of speed and hit a pedestrian, is that crime? All the facts you don't know. How fast was the driver going? Was the driver impaired? Was the pedestrian impaired? Was the pedestrian in a crosswalk? And if you determine that the driver was wrong, is it homicide? Is it manslaughter? Is it criminal negligence? Or is it not a crime at all? These all depend on human beings in analyzing facts that occurred in a split second. And that's what makes the criminal justice system work or not work, which is the individual judgment of the men and women who have to do that job. And as Stephen King's very fictional account shows, that like it or not, it's the Attorney General at the top of the heap who has to make a lot of these judgments. So how do we talk about this issue? Well, we go to the chart. You already know that we have a criminal division. Almost every state does. In Rhode Island and Delaware and Alaska, there are no district attorneys, so the Attorney General does it all. But these skilled trial lawyers handle cases, they try cases, they do conflicts from district attorneys, they go out to rural counties if a DA needs some help. But you should also know at this point, that's not the whole story, because attorneys general also represent the Department of Corrections. So what do we do once someone is convicted or pleads guilty? What do we do with that person? What are those person's constitutional rights? And what about AG opinions? And what about legislative advocacy as to what the statute should be? And we learned in our first week that Walter Mondale's amicus brief was on the criminal case, Gideon versus Wainwright, perhaps one of the most important Supreme Court cases of the 20th century. So attorneys general have a role to play that isn't defined by the four corners of its criminal division. And it's a role that, regardless of all the noise and the outcries that occur from advocacy groups that are sure someone's innocent or sure someone is not guilty, the fact is it's still, at the end of the day, thank goodness, comes down in our system to the stubborn facts. We're going to try to draw on four aspects of the Attorney General's responsibilities during today's class. The first is an area that's unique to Attorneys General, and that is the question of parallel proceedings. This is when the Attorney General criminal and civil responsibilities become entangled, and how can the Attorney General handle them in an ethical fashion. The second is to talk about political corruption. We use two examples, one from Nevada and one from New Mexico, where an Attorney General has to make a criminal justice decision surrounding another elected official with great political implications, while the AG himself or herself is also an elected official and has their own constituency groups. We'll talk about that. The third area is one which is getting increasing attention. The general populace often believes that in the horrible tragedy of a police shooting, that the local prosecutors are unable to make a clear decision as to what is a crime and what is not because of their relationships with local law enforcement. Now, whether that's true or not is another question. And I mean, my experience is DAs handle these cases very seriously, but the public perception is that they do not. And so there is an outcry that these cases should be handled by attorneys general in the state capitol. And that can cut, as you'll see, both ways as we move into the fourth area of discussion, which is criminal justice reform, that has so many different aspects to it. Certainly the question of sentencing, the question of charging, the questions of bail, all of these sorts of issues are right in the core of an attorney general's responsibility. How about the cost it takes for someone who's in prison to make a phone call, which oftentimes goes into, 10, 12, 15 cents a minute when the rest of us are basically making phone calls and videos for free. All these kinds of issues go into an attorney general at a time of very rapid changing situations. We're finding demographics shifting significantly as those in our urban areas see the world very differently than those who see the world statewide, and we're seeing a number of different aspects to it. We hope to deal with that issue in some detail today, and also in the future we'll be having some attorneys general join us virtually into our class as the semester goes along. But criminal justice, at the end of the day, for everything that's said, some AGs have extensive jurisdiction, some have very limited jurisdiction. The article from the Powers and Duties book and NAG, written by Chris Toth, is probably the best chapter in that book. It varies tremendously. But even in states where there are no criminal responsibilities, none, zero, or none that affects a particular hot button issue or an issue that's in the headlines, the Attorney General has the obligation to say something. The Attorney General has that moral obligation that goes to its core that we've been discussing about, that if there's a crime, if there's a wrong, if our Constitution is endangered, it's up to the Attorney General to do something, to speak up in one form or another to the public, to the legislature, to juries, to appellate courts, in order to make sure that our criminal justice system still works.